Dear all viewers, you are listening the Alpa's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy a lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel, because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments. And if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now let's start the story. The rain had not stopped for 7 days. It fell in cold, unforgiving sheets, turning the sacred earth of the royal cemetery to thick, sucking mud. Ilara knelt before the obsidian marker, her thin gray dress plastered to her skin. The chill should have been a torment. It wasn't. Nothing had touched her for 3 long months. Not the cold, not the gnawing hunger in her belly, not even the fresh bruises that bloomed like dark violets across her ribs each morning. Kaelin Thorne, Alpha King of the Silverwood Realm, beloved ruler, fallen in battle. The words carved deep into the stone were a lie, a beautiful, terrible lie. She knew this with a certainty that hollowed her bones, for there was no body resting beneath this mound of wet earth. They never recovered him from the Whispering River, never found a shred of his royal cloak or a splinter of his shield, but Ronan insisted on the burial anyway. He said the pack needed closure, needed to move forward under new leadership, his leadership. Back again, little shadow? The voice behind her was like oil on water, smooth and suffocating. Ilara did not turn. She knew the cadence of those footsteps, heavy with a cruel, satisfied weight. Ronan's shadow fell over her, blocking what little gray light filtered through the weeping sky. The steward tells me you missed your weaving duties, again. He stopped beside her, close enough that the scent of spiced wine clung to the damp air between them. That makes 3 times a week. The others are beginning to talk. I needed to be here, Ilara whispered, her voice raw from disuse. He is dust, Ilara. Ronan crouched, bringing his face level with hers. Where Kaelin's eyes had been the warm gold of harvest wheat, Ronan's were the pale, flat gray of a winter tombstone. 3 months, dust. Your period of mourning is over. The pack has moved on. You would do well to follow. Ilara's hands clenched in the mud. Once, her gift of resonance would have flooded her with the truth of him, the slick satisfaction, the coiled malice, the dark joy he took in her visible despair. Now she felt only a vast, echoing silence. The grief had scoured her clean, leaving her empty. I loved him, she breathed, the words misting in the cold air, and he is gone. Ronan's hand shot out, fingers like iron bands closing around her forearm. He hauled her roughly to her feet, which means you belong to the pack, now, to me. The words were a death sentence, spoken so casually they froze her blood in her veins. She had heard the whispers in the scullery, seen the way his gaze lingered on her in the torchlit corridors. As Kaelin's chosen companion, his intended mate, she enjoyed status, protection, a future bright with promise. As Ronan's ward, she was property, less than property, a problem to be solved. The council has reached its decision, Ronan continued, his grip tightening until she gasped. You will be made useful, one way or another. I have already received inquiries. Inquiries? The word was a brittle thing, cracking in her throat. 3 alphas from the Iron Frost Peaks, 2 from the sun-scarred coast. His lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. They are most eager to acquire the young woman who almost became queen. Some speak of political alliance, others are more interested in the novelty, the trophy. Ilara's knees trembled, threatening to buckle. This could not be happening. Kaelin had promised. He had sworn an oath on the ancestral stones that no harm would ever come to her under his protection. But Kaelin was gone, and his oaths had dissolved like salt in the relentless rain. Please, she begged, hating the weakness in her own voice. I will work dawn until dusk. I will take triple duties. Just do not do this. Do not what? Ronan released her so suddenly she stumbled, mud coating her hands. Do not trade a redundant omega for the good of the realm. You have no family, no true pack ties, and your protector is dead. Your resonance gift is shattered. You are a blank page, Ilara, and I will write upon you what the Silverwood needs. The viewing is in 3 days. I suggest you make your peace with this patch of dirt. It is the last time you will see it. Ilara watched him stride away, her body trembling not from cold, but from a terror so profound that it had a taste, like cold iron and bitter ash. 3 days. In 3 days, she would be paraded before foreign alphas like a piece of fine horseflesh, her fate decided by the heaviest purse. She would be taken to some distant, harsh territory where no one knew her name, where her story was irrelevant, and her survival a matter of indifference. She turned back to the slick, black stone. Placing her palm flat against its chilled surface, she leaned her forehead to it. I do not know how to face this, she whispered, the rain mingling with the salt on her cheeks. I do not know how to be this brave without you. The stone offered no comfort, no wisdom, no ghost of warmth. But deep within the ancient, rain-drenched pines that bordered the cemetery, a shadow detached itself from the greater darkness. He should not be here. Kaelin knew this with every fiber of his being. He had carved the rules of his survival into his own soul. Stay hidden, stay silent, trust no one. 3 months of relentless discipline, of burying the man he was to become a ghost in his own kingdom. And all of it, every ounce of control, shattered the moment he saw the fresh bruise darkening on Ilara's pale arm. His claws threatened to break skin, extending in a silent, furious response. The wolf within him howled, a silentless rage that demanded violence, that he tear Ronan limb to limb, that he reclaim what was his and scorch the earth of this betrayal. But he couldn't. Not yet. From his hidden vantage, shrouded by pine boughs, Kaelin watched Ilara press her palm to his grave. He could see the tremble in her shoulders, the silent movement of her lips as she spoke to a dead man who stood, breathing and bleeding, barely 50 paces away. The agony in his chest was a physical wound, deeper than the poison that had once stilled his heart. She was a faded portrait of the woman he left behind. The soft curves he remembered had sharpened into painful angles. Her vibrant hair hung lank and dull around a face that was now a map of sorrow. I did this to her. The thought was a poison of its own. His hands, pressed against the rough bark of the tree, trembled with the need to act. He wanted to run to her, to gather her up and whisper the terrible truth. The ambush, the treachery from within his own guard, the poison that mimicked death, the necessary deception. But Ronan had eyes everywhere. The moment Kaelin showed himself, the conspiracy that had tried to kill him once would succeed, and they would not stop with him. Ilara would be the first casualty. His wolf snarled in helpless fury. 3 months of watching from the shadows, of intercepting whispers about her mistreatment, of knowing every day he played dead was another day she drowned. And now Ronan planned to sell her. A red haze descended over Kaelin's vision. The careful plans, the patient network of loyalists, the strategy, it all burned away in the face of this ultimate insult. He had 3 days. 3 days to unravel a web of treason that reached into the heart of his court. 3 days to find every venomous spider and crush it. 3 days to rise from the grave and reclaim his throne. 3 days before he lost her forever. Kaelin watched Ilara stumble away from the cemetery, her arms wrapped tight around herself, a small, broken figure being swallowed by the gray rain. "Hold on, my heart," he breathed into the wind, a vow meant for her ears alone, though she could not hear it. Just a little longer. Then he turned, melting back into the forest with the silent, lethal grace of the predator he was. The game had changed. The ghost was done watching. It was time to hunt. Chapter 2. 4 months earlier, the first time Alara laid eyes on Kaelin Thorne, she was certain she was looking at her executioner. The Alpha King's visit to the remote Willowbrook settlement was an unprecedented event, one that sent the humble border community into a frenzy of terrified preparation. Alara stood with the other unmated Omegas in the central square, head bowed so low her chin touched her chest, as the royal contingent thundered in. The ground itself seemed to shake under the hoofbeats. "Where is the resonant?" His voice cut through the nervous chatter, deep and resonant, carrying the weight of the mountains. Alara's heart seized. The elders had sworn to keep her gift secret. It was a fragile, private thing, not a spectacle for powerful alphas who might see it as a tool or a threat. "My king," Elder Joran stepped forward, his voice quavering. "The girl, her abilities are minor, faint echoes, really, hardly worth your esteemed notice." "I will decide what is worthy of my notice." Boots crunched on gravel, moving closer. A heavy silence fell. "Look at me." The command was not a shout, but it brooked no disobedience. Every instinct screamed at Alara to keep her eyes down, to make herself small and invisible. Yet something in the tone, not cruelty but a fierce curiosity, compelled her. She lifted her gaze and found herself trapped in eyes of molten amber, not cold, not assessing, but intensely focused. And then her gift, always so reluctant and shy, surged forward without permission. It was not a trickle of emotion, but a flood. She felt the immense strength in him, a force like a river current, but restrained by walls of willpower. She felt the heavy mantle of his authority, but it was tempered by a profound, weary compassion. Beneath the regal exterior, a deep, aching loneliness resonated, a hollow space that echoed, and shimmering at the very edge of her perception, wonder? He was looking at her with wonder. "You sense it," he stated, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "What I am, what I carry." "Yes," she whispered, incapable of deception before this truth. "Then you know I intend you no harm." And she did know. Her gift had never spoken with such crystalline clarity. This terrifying king, who held the power of life and death over everyone in the square, would sooner fall on his own sword than cause her pain. The realization was dizzying. "Come with me," he said, extending a hand not clad in a mailed fist, but open, palm up. "Not as a captive, not as a prize, as an honored guest under my personal protection. Let me show you a world where your gift is a wonder, not a secret to be buried." The elders gasped. The other Omegas stared. Alara looked from his strong, scarred hand to his earnest, open face, and then she placed her hand in his. The weeks that followed were a dream spun from sunlight. In the soaring stone fortress of Silverwood Keep, Alara discovered the man behind the crown. She met Kaelin, who laughed until he choked at her clumsy jokes about the stuffy court officials. She met Kaelin, who would sit for hours in the library, listening with rapt attention as she tried to describe the impossible colors of emotions. How joy was a shimmering gold, grief a deep indigo blue, anxiety a spiky sour green. She met Kaelin, who arrived one afternoon with a single perfect bloom of midnight orchids from the royal greenhouse, because she'd mentioned once in passing that she missed the wildflowers of home. One evening, walking the high battlements as the sun bled into the horizon, she finally found the courage to ask, "Your Majesty, you could have your pick of any noble-born Omega in the realm, ones with powerful families, with political ties. I am nobody from nowhere." Kaelin stopped, turning to face her. The dying light set him his profile aflame. "Because you see me, Alara," he said, his voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Not the crown of Silverwood, not the Alpha King. You see the man who lies awake at night, terrified of failing the people who depend on him. The boy who still visits his mother's garden and misses her every day. the wolf who believed for a long time that he was too fractured, too burdened to ever be worthy of a true bond. He reached out, cupping her face with a reverence that made her breath catch. "You sense the truth of me, the good and the flawed, and you have not run away." Her gift sang in agreement, a warm hum in her chest. He was laid bare before her, and what she saw was not a perfect king, but a profoundly good man. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "I want you as my companion, my mate, not because you are a resonant, but because when you are near, the noise of the world fades. For the first time in my life, I feel peace. I feel whole." The word yes was on her lips before she even formed the thought. Yes, she breathed. The mating ceremony was set for the autumn equinox, a celebration for the entire realm. It was to be a union of legend, a king and his true-hearted queen. They never made it to autumn. 6 weeks before the ceremony, Kaelin rode out to mediate a minor border skirmish. Routine, he'd assured her, brushing a kiss to her knuckles. "I will be back before you have time to miss me." 3 days later, Ronan returned alone, his armor scarred, his face a mask of grim tragedy. The king was dead, betrayed by supposed allies, overwhelmed, his body lost to the raging whispering river, and Alara's world, along with her resonant gift, shattered into silent black fragments. Chapter 3. The servants' quarters in the west wing of Silverwood Keep always smelled of damp stone, stale bread, and despair. Alara lay on her thin straw pallet, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that had slowly spread over 3 months, shaped like a twisted, leafless tree. Once she had slept in the sun-drenched tower chamber Kaelin had prepared for her, with silken sheets and a window that looked out over the forest he loved. Now she shared a cramped, windowless cell with 5 other Omegas, her status stripped away the hour after Kaelin's empty casket was lowered into the ground. Ronan, as acting steward for the Transitional Council, had decreed it. "Up, Omega." The overseer's boot connected with the edge of her pallet, jolting her ribs. "Kitchen, now. The steward expects his morning meal promptly, and the hearth won't light itself." The steward. The title was a carefully chosen insult, a temporary label for a permanent ambition. Ronan wore Kaelin's absence like a crown, sat at the head of the high table in the great hall as if born to it. The council, shell-shocked and leaderless, had acquiesced. Kaelin's own cousin, his chief beta, the logical choice in a time of crisis. Alara dragged herself upright, each movement a minor agony. The bruise on her arm from Ronan's grip yesterday was a livid purple beneath her coarse woolen sleeve. In the cavernous kitchen, head cook Marin set her to the most back-breaking tasks, whether it was personal malice or simply the pack's new order, where the former king's favorite was now the lowest of the low. Alara didn't know. Her gift would have told her once. Now she navigated a world rendered in mute, painful shades of gray. "Faster, girl," Marin snapped, thumping a massive basket of knobby root vegetables before her, "unless you'd prefer another taste of the switching rod." Her hands moved on their own. Scrub, peel, chop. The mindless rhythm was a small mercy, a space where her thoughts could drift to forbidden places. Kaelin's hand on the small of her back as he guided her through the steps of a court dance. Kaelin's shout of laughter when she'd accidentally addressed him as "your grumpiness" during a tense council meeting. Kaelin's eyes, soft and solemn, as he slipped the betrothal bracelet of woven silver and moonstone onto her wrist. The bracelet Ronan had torn from her arm the day after the funeral, claiming it was pack property to be held in trust. Daydreaming of your phantom king? The wooden spoon cracked down on her knuckles with a sharp, stinging pain. Useless creature. No wonder his spirit wanders. Alara's head jerked up. What? Marin's eyes darted around nervously before she leaned in, her voice a harsh whisper. The night guards talk, shapes in the forest that don't cast a shadow, a wolf with eyes that glow like coals, watching the walls but never approaching. They say it's the dead king's ghost. She made a warding sign with her flour-dusted fingers. Restless, angry that his chosen one serves another. I serve no one but the pack, Alara whispered, but the words felt hollow. Not yet, Marin sneered, but I've seen how the steward watches you. Once you're sold off and returned diminished, he'll take what's left for himself. That's the way of things for pretty Omegas with no one to speak for them. The prediction landed with the force of a physical blow. Alara bent back over the vegetable pile, using her hair as a curtain to hide the hot tears of shame and fear that welled in her eyes. Outside the kitchen's high barred window, in the dense thicket of winter bare hawthorn, a pair of amber eyes watched, and the fury in them burned hotter than any hearth fire. A child's scream, sharp and jagged with pain, shattered the morning's drudgery. Alara dropped her paring knife, its clatter lost as she was already moving, pushing past startled scullery maids towards the source of the sound. In the main courtyard, a small crowd had gathered. In the center, a young stable boy, a pup of no more than 8, cradled his arm, which was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. His face was white as chalk. Little fool tried to brush down the steward's new stallion, a guard muttered to no one in particular. Got a kick for his trouble. Someone fetch the healer, a kitchen maid cried. Healer's with the steward, another voice replied dismissively. He won't come running for a stable brat. The boy moaned, his eyes rolling back. Alara shoved her way through, falling to her knees on the cold cobblestones beside him. "Let me see," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Don't touch him, Omega," a guard warned, his hand moving to his sword hilt. "You'll make it worse." "The bone needs to be set before it begins to mend wrong," Alara stated, her hands already hovering over the injury. Her mind flashed to long afternoons in the castle infirmary, Kaelin at her side, insisting she learn the basics of field medicine. "A queen must know how to mend her people," he'd said. "It is the first duty of care." She pushed the memory aside, focusing. "Please," the boy whimpered, his large eyes filled with terror. Alara didn't wait for permission. Her fingers, gentle but firm, found the break. She took a steadying breath, then, with a swift, precise motion, manipulated the bone back into alignment. The boy screamed once, a short, sharp sound, then slumped with relief as the worst of the agony subsided. "I need cloth for a sling," she ordered, looking up at the gathered crowd, "and something rigid for a splint, a wooden spoon, a piece of hearthwood, anything." For a moment, no one moved. Then, a young guard she didn't recognize stepped forward, unbuckling a leather strap from her vambrace. Another produced a clean, if ragged, strip of linen. Alara worked quickly, immobilizing the arm with efficient, confident movements. When she was done, the boy's breathing had evened, and a faint touch of color had returned to his cheeks. He looked up at her, not with fear, but with a dawning awe. "Thank you, my lady," he whispered. The crowd parted silently. Ronan stood there, his expression unreadable. "The grieving shadow plays at being a healer," he said, his tone deceptively light. He began to circle her slowly. "Servants scrub floors. They do not give orders to guards. They do not touch what is not theirs to mend."
"He is a child," Alara said, rising but keeping her eyes lowered. "He was in pain. I had the skill to help." "Pain is a teacher," Ronan countered, stopping directly in front of her. He was so close she could see the fine lines of cruelty around his mouth. "A lesson you will no doubt relearn thoroughly with your new master." His fingers shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her head up. Against every instinct of self-preservation, her eyes met his flat gray ones. And for one fleeting, dizzying second, her silent gift twitched. It was like a limb long thought paralyzed, sending a single, sharp pulse of sensation. She felt him, not clearly, but in murky, oily waves. The satisfaction of his control, the cruel pleasure in her humiliation. But churning beneath it, like a hidden current in a foul pond, was something else. A deep, gnawing, constant fear. Fear of something he could not see, could not control. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping. Ronan's eyes narrowed, as if he'd sensed the intrusion. 2 days, he whispered, the words for her ears alone, his breath smelling of wine and mint. Savor them. He released her with a shove and strode away, his guards falling in behind him. Ilara stood trembling in the courtyard, but this time the tremor was not solely from fear. Something had stirred in the depths of her soul. A faint, familiar warmth, long thought extinguished, had flickered back to life. Chapter 4. That night, sleep was a distant country. Ilara lay in the oppressive darkness of the shared quarters, listening to the ragged breathing and soft whimpers of the other Omegas. The encounter in the courtyard played behind her eyes, especially that shocking, momentary flare of her resonance. He is afraid. The knowledge was a tiny, hard seed of hope. What did a man who had everything, power, a stolen throne, the submission of a pack, have to fear? A soft scraping noise at the small, high window made her freeze. It was too deliberate to be a branch in the wind. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should scream. She should wake the others. But a strange, compelling certainty held her silent. Slowly, she turned her head on the thin pillow. A deeper shadow blotting out the faint starlight coalesced at the window ledge. It resolved into a silhouette she knew in her bones, in her soul, in the very marrow that had ached for him for 92 endless days. "You are a dream," she breathed into the darkness, the words barely audible. "A trick of my grief." "Am I?" The voice was a rough scrape of sound, weathered by wind and pain, but it was his. It was the voice that had whispered promises in sunlit gardens, the voice that commanded a kingdom, the voice that haunted her every waking and sleeping moment. The figure dropped from the window ledge into the room with a predator's silent grace. Moonlight from the high window fell across him as he took a single step forward. Ilara's fan flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. Kalen! But a Kalen transformed. He was leaner, harder, all sharp planes and taut muscle beneath rough-spun traveler's clothes. A vicious, fresh scar cut a pale path from his temple down his left cheek. A beard, weeks untrimmed, shadowed his jaw. But his eyes, those amber eyes that had been the last thing she saw each night for months, burned with a fierce, living intensity. How? The word was a broken thing, torn from a place of raw, bleeding hope. "I felt the bond. It went silent. I felt you'd die." He crossed the remaining space in an instant, not to embrace her, but to kneel beside her pallet, his hands hovering as if afraid to touch. "Poison," he said, the word a curse. A rare, insidious thing from the southern marshes. It mimics death, slows the heart to a whisper, stills the breath. They left me for the river, sure of their work. By the time I woke on a bank 10 leagues downstream, Ronan had already declared me dead and cemented his hold. Tears streamed hot and silent down Ilara's face. Then why? Why stay hidden? Why let everyone believe, while She couldn't finish. The images of those first days, the all-consuming blackness, the feeling of being hollowed out like a gourd, rose up, threatening to choke her. Pain etched deep lines into Kalen's face. Because the arrow that bore that poison did not come from a random raider's bow, it came from my own guard. Ronan's plot. At least 3 members of the High Council are with him, and a dozen more sworn blades. This was not an ambush. It was a coup, years in the making. He finally reached out, his calloused thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. The touch was an electric shock, a confirmation of life. The moment I show myself, they finish the job, and they will leave no loose ends. Anyone loyal to me, anyone Love. His voice fractured on the last word. You, Ilara, you would be their first target, to erase my line, to erase my hope. The full, horrifying truth crashed over her, a wave of ice water. You stayed dead to protect me. I stayed dead to gather proof, to find the loyal hearts still beating in this keep, to plan, to wait for the right moment to tear this corruption out by the roots. His jaw tightened, the muscle flickering. But then I learned of his plans for you, the auction. The word was a growl, vibrating with pure, unleashed fury. No one will touch you. No one will sell you. No one will even look at you with anything but respect. I swear this on my life, which is yours. I am not a possession to be reclaimed, she whispered, but there was no strength in the protest, only a dazed wonder. You are my heart, he corrected, his voice softening. The only reason that poison did not finish its work. I woke in that river with your name the only thought in my mind. I clawed my way onto that bank because the idea of you alone in this world, thinking I had abandoned you, was a fate worse than any death. As he spoke, a warmth blossomed deep in Ilara's chest. A faint golden thread, thin as spider silk but unmistakable, spun itself from her core towards his. The bond, the silent, shattered bond, was not dead. It was healing. I feel it, she gasped, her hand pressing to her sternum. A lick of profound relief washed over Kaylin's strained features. Ilara, I need you to trust me. One more day. Give me until tomorrow night. Let me finish what I have begun, and then I swear by the old gods and the new, I will never be parted from you again. What happens tomorrow night?
His smile was a flash of white in the darkness, sharp and dangerous. Ronan hosts a viewing. I host a resurrection. Before she could respond, the sound of booted feet echoed in the stone corridor outside, coming closer. Kaylin tensed, already shifting towards the window. "Wait," she breathed, her hand darting out to clasp his wrist. "Do not leave me again, please." He turned back, his eyes drinking her in as if memorizing her face. He raised her hand, pressing a kiss not to her lips, but to the inside of her wrist, over the frantic pulse there, a gesture of reverence, of promise. "If they find me here tonight, all is lost. Ronan must believe he has won. I need his arrogance. I need him comfortable." He pulled away, his warmth retreating. "He is afraid, Kaylin," she said suddenly, urgently. "Today, when my gift flickered, I felt it, a deep, seeping fear of something he cannot control." Kaylin paused, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "He knows," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Some part of him suspects the truth. That fear will make him reckless, and reckless men make fatal errors." The footsteps were just outside the door. With one last, lingering look that held a universe of promises, Kaylin slipped through the window and was gone, melting into the night as if he were part of it. "Tomorrow," his voice drifted back on a whisper of wind. "Stay alive for me, Ilara. I am coming for you. I promise." She was left alone in the dark, her wrist tingling where his lips had been, her chest alight with a fragile, blazing hope, and her gift, her beautiful, broken gift, humming a quiet, steady song of return. Chapter 5. Dawn broke, pale and tentative over Silverwood Keep. Ilara moved through her assigned duties with a newfound, sharp-edged clarity. The oppressive stone walls were no longer just a prison, they were a map. Every corridor, every guard post, every whispered conversation in a shadowed alcove held new meaning. Her reawakened gift pulsed softly beneath her skin, a quiet radar picking up the emotional currents of the fortress. She paid attention now, real attention. She saw the guards who exchanged quick, grim nods when Ronan passed, the loyalists forced into compliance. She saw the ones who swaggered, their chests puffed with new importance, Ronan's men. She noted the council members who moved through the halls with averted eyes and tight smiles, their guilt or fear a sour tang she could almost taste. Traitors, they were everywhere. But so were others, the old cook who always saved her an extra crust of bread, the young guard who gave his leather strap for the boy's splint, the weary-eyed scribe who had been Kalen's favorite, wolves who remembered justice and who now suffered under a rule of spite. "You seem different today," head cook Marin observed, her beady eyes suspicious as she watched Elara knead dough. "Less of a ghost." "I have accepted the pack's will. There's no use clinging to shadows." Elara replied, keeping her voice bland, her eyes on her work. Marin grunted, unconvinced but unwilling to pursue it. The lie was a shield. Beneath the calm exterior, Elara's mind was racing, her senses heightened. That afternoon, opportunity presented itself. Nessa, a young scullery maid, with fingers raw from lye soap, tripped and spilled a cauldron of near-boiling washing water over her own feet. The girl bit back a scream, sinking to the floor with tears of pain and fear streaking her dirty face. Punishment for clumsiness was swift and brutal under Ronan's stewards. Without a word, Elara pulled Nessa into the relative privacy of the dry goods pantry. "Let me see," she said, her voice gentle. "It's nothing. I'm fine," Nessa whimpered, but the blisters rising on her ankles told a different story. "This will fester if it's not treated." Elara knelt, placing her palms gently over the worst of the burns. She focused, not knowing what she was doing, simply reaching for that new warmth inside her, the one that had flared when Kalen returned. It responded. A gentle golden heat flowed from her hands, soothing the angry red flesh. The blisters receded, the redness faded. Within moments, Nessa's skin was smooth and unmarked, save for a slight pinkness. Nessa stared, her mouth agape. "But your gift, it was feeling, not healing." Elara looked at her own hands, equally astonished. "So I thought." The bond with Kalen, rekindled and strong, had unlocked a dormant depth to her resonance. She could not just sense wounds of the heart, she could now mend wounds of the flesh. "Please," she whispered, gripping Nessa's shoulders, "tell no one, not yet." Tears of gratitude welled in Nessa's eyes. "You saved me from a whipping, maybe worse. I won't forget this. Some of us, we remember the king, we pray for him still." The whispered confession was a spark in the dark. Elara squeezed her hand. "Keep praying," she murmured. Word did not spread through shouts, but through the silent, efficient network of the oppressed. A twisted ankle from a fall on the stairs, a deep gash from a broken dish, a child in the lower quarters burning with fever. They came to Elara in hushed secrecy, under cover of night, or in forgotten corners, and she helped all them. With each act of healing, her gift grew stronger, more responsive, and with each healed wound, something intangible shifted in the fortress. A fragile, stubborn thing called hope began to whisper through the stones. Elara became a collector of secrets. The servants saw everything. They knew which guards drank themselves to sleep, mourning the old ways. They knew which council members slipped into Ronan's chambers long after midnight. They knew where the spare armory keys were hung and how many men patrolled the postern gate. At night, when the keep was locked down, she would slip to the old, disused herb garden, to a loose stone in the wall Kalen had shown her long ago, and she would whisper her findings into the crack. Counselor Vexley meets with Ronan in the North Tower after the midnight bell. Captain Gorin has tripled the guard on the vaults. They are moving something. They are securing their plunder, preparing to run if needed. Kalen's voice drifted back, warming her soul. "Will it be enough, your loyalists against their numbers?" she asked, the fear for him a constant companion. A pause, then his voice steady and sure. "It will be close, but I have an advantage they cannot anticipate." What advantage? She could feel his smile through their bond, a faint golden curl in her mind. "You." "Me?" Ilara frowned into the darkness. "I am no warrior." "You are a resonant who can now heal. Do you understand how rare that is, how powerful? You will feel the lie in their hearts before they strike. You will mend our wounded while theirs fall. You are not just my hope, Ilara. You are the key to this kingdom's redemption." Pride and terror war within her. Before she could voice her doubt, the sound of the night watch's rounds echoed too close.
"Tonight," Kalen's voice was urgent, final. "It happens tonight. Be ready." Then his presence faded, leaving her alone with the weight of destiny and the echo of a promise that would change everything before the next dawn. Chapter 6. The attack did not come with the dawn, but in the deepest hour of the night, when the world is at its blackest and hope feels like a forgotten dream. Ilara was not asleep. She was sitting on her pallet, fully dressed, listening to the fortress breathe, the snoring, the rustling, the distant call of the watch. She felt it first through the bond, a sharp, focused intent from Kalen, followed by a wave of protective fury. Then the sounds began. Not the orderly clash of training, but the chaotic, horrifying symphony of real battle. A roar of many voices, the unmistakable ring of steel meeting steel. A scream cut brutally short. Then, rising above it all, a sound that lifted the hairs on her arms and sent a primal thrill down her spine. The unified, terrifying howl of wolves going to war. Kalen. It was too soon. The plan was for tomorrow night, after the viewing. Something had forced his hand. She burst from the servants' quarters into a corridor choked with smoke and panicked people. Servants ran in every direction, some clutching children, others simply frozen in terror. Through the haze, she saw flashes of combat. Loyalist guards in familiar silver-gray livery fighting against Ronan's men, who now wore black armbands. Her gift ignited like a torch. It painted the world in swirling colors of intent. Loyalty shone a steady, clear blue. Treachery burned an angry, spitting red. Fear was a sickly yellow-green. She became a beacon in the chaos, shouting warnings, pointing out ambushers, guiding Kalen's fighters with the unerring sight of her resonance. She fought her way toward the heart of the keep, the great hall. The doors were blasted open, one hanging from a single hinge. Inside was a scene from a dark legend. Kalen stood at the center of a shrinking circle of his loyalists, his sword a blur of silver light. He fought with a brutal, beautiful efficiency, every movement speaking of a lifetime of training and 3 months of pent-up rage. He was the Alpha King returned, a force of nature made flesh. But they were losing. There were too many black armbanded guards pouring in from side passages, far more than their intelligence had accounted for. And standing on the dais, where Kalen's throne sat, was Ronan. He was not fighting, he was watching, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Did you think I was a fool, cousin?" Ronan's voice rang out, smug and triumphant. "Your little shadow is not the only one with ears in the walls. Did you really believe Counselor Marsh was still yours? He has been my creature for years." Kalen's sword faltered for a fraction of a second. The betrayal was a physical blow. Marsh had been like an uncle, a trusted advisor. The momentary lapse cost him. A loyalist fell beside him. Another was forced back, bleeding from a gash on his arm. The circle tightened. Desperation clawed at Ilara's throat. She saw the calculation in Kalen's eyes, the terrible, loving look he cast toward her across the blood-slicked floor. "Surrender," Ronan called, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Lay down your arms, and I will be merciful. Fight on, and I will make you watch what happens to those who cling to ghosts." His eyes found Ilara, and the promise in them was vile. Kaelin followed his gaze. Ilara felt the conflict in him through the bond, the king's refusal to yield, the man's terror for her safety. The love won. Slowly, heartbreakingly, he lowered his sword. The point touched the stone floor with a final, dull clink. "No!" Ilara's scream tore from her lungs. "No, Kaelin, don't! He will kill you anyway!" But Kaelin was already going to his knees, his head bowed in a posture of defeat. Ronan descended from the dais, drawing a long, wicked dagger from his belt, the same style of blade, Ilara realized with a jolt of horror, that the assassin had used by the river. He stopped before Kaelin, savoring the moment. "Any last words for your shadow?" he asked, raising the dagger. Kaelin looked up, and despite everything, the betrayal, the imminent defeat, the poison on the blade, he smiled. It was a smile of pure, unshakable certainty. He said, his voice carrying through the suddenly hushed hall, "Just 3. Now, my heart." Ilara didn't understand. Her mind raced. She had no weapon. She was surrounded. "Now, my heart." The words were not a farewell. They were a signal to her. The bond between them blazed hot white, a conduit opening wide. Her resonance, which had been sensing and healing, now erupted in a new, overwhelming way. It was not an emotion she sent, but truth itself. Raw, uncompromising, undeniable truth. The wave of it pulsed out from her core, visible as a shimmer in the air. It hit every wolf in the hall. For Kaelin's loyalists, it was a clarion call, a burst of strength and righteousness that straightened their backs. For Ronan's traitors, it was a judgment. They were flooded with the full, hideous weight of their own treachery, the betrayal of their oaths, their king, their pack. Men cried out, dropping their weapons to clutch their heads, overwhelmed by guilt and shame. But Ronan did not fall. He staggered, blood trickling from his nose from the psychic assault, but his hatred was a pillar of iron. His eyes, wild with fury, locked on Ilara. "If I cannot have this kingdom, then neither will he." He changed his target in an instant, lunging not at the kneeling Kaelin, but across the space towards Ilara, the poisoned dagger aimed at her heart. Time seemed to slow. Ilara saw the blade coming, saw the murder in his eyes. She had no time to move, no time to scream, but Kaelin moved faster than thought. He was a blur of motion, throwing himself bodily between her and Ronan's strike. The sickening sound of steel punching through leather and flesh was the loudest thing in the world. The dagger meant for her heart sunk deep into Kaelin's chest, just below his shoulder. A searing, tearing agony ripped through Ilara's own body, a sympathetic echo through the bond. She screamed, catching Kaelin as he crumpled backward into her arms. His weight drove her to her knees. "No, no, no, no," she chanted, her hands flying to the wound, coming away slick and dark with his blood. "Not again! I cannot lose you again!" Ronan stared, shocked by his own failure, by Kaelin's sacrifice. Before he could recover, a massive shape barreled into him. Torin, the grizzled captain of the Gate Watch, his eyes mad with grief and rage. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The sounds of their struggle faded into a distant roar as Ilara focused everything on the man dying in her arms. His face was already pale, his breath coming in wet, shallow gasps. The poison was working fast, a coldness spreading from the wound.
"Hold on," she begged, pressing her hands over the gushing wound, pouring every ounce of her healing gift into him. Please, Kaelin, look at me. Hold on. Her power flowed into him, a river of golden light fighting against the spreading black tide of the toxin. She felt it resist her, a vile, intelligent corruption designed to counter life itself, to mimic death so perfectly it could fool even the bonds of fate. Worth it, Kaelin gasped, a bubble of blood forming on his lips. His amber eyes, glazing with pain, found hers. Protecting you. Always worth it. No, she snarled, the sound feral. I will not accept this. Do you hear me, Kaelin Thorne? I mourned you once. I will not mourn you again. She dug deeper, past the limits of her known power, past her own strength. She tapped into the bond itself, into the love that was their shared soul, into the promise of a future they had barely tasted. It was a reckless, desperate gambit, pouring her own life force into his, daring the poison to try and sever a bond that was older than crowns, deeper than blood. Around them, the battle reached its brutal conclusion. Torrin rose from Ronan's lifeless body, his own face a mask of blood and grim satisfaction. The remaining traitors, leaderless and broken by Alara's truth blast, were being subdued. But in the center of the hall, their king was slipping away. The bond flickered, growing thin and faint. Alara felt the coldness creeping into her own limbs. She was giving too much, but she refused to stop. If saving him meant following him, then she would. The kingdom could burn. Her world was in her arms. I need you, she whispered against his cooling skin, her tears falling on his face. I need you. Come back to me. She poured the last of her strength, her love, her very essence into the fight. And then she felt it, a crack in the poison's hold, a single golden thread of Kaelin's own indomitable will twining with hers. Together they pushed, the black corruption shattered like dark glass. Color flooded back into Kaelin's face, the ghastly pallor receded, his chest rose in a deep, shuddering breath. The terrible wound beneath her hands knitted closed, leaving only a pale, jagged scar. His eyelids fluttered, then opened. The amber eyes that met hers were clear, focused, and filled with a wonder that mirrored her own. Ilara, he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. You impossible, reckless, glorious fool, she sobbed, laughing and crying, clutching his face in her blood-stained hands. He struggled to sit up, wincing only slightly. I prefer devoted, he managed, his voice gaining strength. His gaze swept the hall, taking in the scene, the defeated traitors, the weary but victorious loyalists, the body of his cousin. Is it over? Captain Torrin said, dropping to one knee before them, his head bowed. The keep is secure. Your orders, my king. Kaelin looked at the faces of those who had fought for him, then down at Ilara, who had brought him back from death's door for a second time. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Secure the gates. Tend to our wounded. Account for the fallen with honor. He paused, his eyes hardening. And someone find my crown. I believe my cousin was keeping it warm for me. A ragged, exhausted but triumphant cheer rose from the loyalists. Kaelin ignored it, his attention only for the woman beside him. You saved me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Someone has to, she murmured, leaning her forehead against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, alive, real, hers. You have a terrible habit of almost dying. Then I suppose you'll have to stay by my side to keep me out of trouble. Is that a proposal or a royal command? It is a fact, he said softly, pressing a kiss to her hair. I was dead without you, Ilara, in every way that matters. You are my heartbeat, my reason, my home. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. Kaelin Thorne, marry me, not because the kingdom needs a queen, but because I love you more than the sun loves the dawn, and I refuse to spend another moment of my life anywhere but by your side.
His answer was in his eyes, in the brilliant smile that erased the last of the pain and shadows, and in the way he held her as if she were the most precious thing in all the realms. Chapter 7. The spring that came to Silverwood was not just a change of season, it was a rebirth. The fortress that had echoed with the grim footsteps of tyranny now rang with the sounds of repair, of laughter, of life returning. In the great hall, where blood had stained the stones, a celebration was unfolding that would be sung about for generations. Wolves from every corner of the realm had come, not out of fear or obligation, but to witness a miracle, the return of their true king and the rise of his queen. Alara stood at the head of the hall, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She wore a gown the color of moonlight and new snow, her dark hair braided with delicate silver chains and tiny star-like pearls. Across from her, Kaelin stood tall and straight in the formal black and silver of the Alpha King, the ancient crown of intertwined oak and silver resting lightly on his brow. His amber eyes held hers, a steady anchor in the sea of faces. "Nervous?" he murmured, the ghost of a smile touching his lips as she took her place beside him. "Terrified," she admitted. "There are so many people." "Then look only at me," he said, taking both her hands in his. "The others are merely witnesses to our joy." The elder, a woman with kind eyes and a voice like rustling leaves, spoke of ancient bonds, of duty to pack and land, of the sacred trust of the mate bond. But when the time came for their vows, Ilara knew the traditional words were not enough. She turned fully to Kaelin, her voice clear and strong, carrying to the very back of the hall. "I spent 3 months at a grave made of lies. I mourned you with every breath I took. I thought the best part of me was buried with you, that I would wander the world a ghost forever." She squeezed his hands. "And then you returned, not as a phantom, not as a memory, but as the stubborn, brave, and beautiful wolf who refused to let betrayal or poison or even death keep you from your promise, from me." A tear traced a path down her cheek, but her voice did not waver. "Kaelin, I will stand with you, not behind you, not for you, but with you. As your partner, your equal, your mate in all things that matter." A small, genuine smile broke through. "And apparently as your personal healer, since you seemed determined to find new ways to test my skills." A ripple of warm laughter moved through the crowd. Kaelin raised her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried the same weight of truth. "I vow to spend my life striving to be worthy of you, Alara. Every sunrise, I will try to be the king you believe I can be, the mate you deserve, the man who would move mountains to see you smile." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper for her alone, though the microphone picked up the raw emotion. "I vow to never give you cause to mourn me again." The elder presented the ceremonial cup, filled with honeyed wine and a drop of blood from each of their palms, the sharing of life. They drank together. Then came the final, ancient rite. Kaelin tilted her head gently, exposing the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder. His teeth elongated, not in aggression but in sacred promise. The mating bite was swift, precise, and surprisingly gentle, a claiming not of ownership but of eternal belonging. Alara felt the bond between them, already strong, lock into place with a final, unbreakable certainty. A soft golden light seemed to emanate from where they were joined, witnessed by all, a sign of the old magic's blessing. She was no longer Alara, the orphaned resonant from Willowbrook. She was no longer the broken Omega who knelt in the rain. She was Alara Thorn, queen of the Silverwood realm, mate of the Alpha King who had loved her enough to die for her, and loved her even more by fighting his way back. As they turned to face the cheering hall, hands clasped tightly, Alera's eyes found Captain Torin near the great doors. His scarred face was softened by an expression of profound peace. He gave a slow, respectful nod. The healing was not just for them, she realized. It was for all of Silverwood. The ceremony melted into a feast. Music swelled, and soon the floor was filled with dancers. Kaelin led Alera into the first dance, a traditional, graceful waltz. "I believe I promised to teach you to dance without stepping on my feet," he teased, guiding her effortlessly. "I believe you spent more time talking than teaching," she shot back, smiling up at him. For a while, they existed in a bubble of joy, surrounded by music and well-wishes. But duty, as it always did for a king, called. Counselors approached with matters that needed attention: the disposition of the captured traitors, messages from allied pacts, the reorganization of the guard. Kaelin handled each with a patient efficiency that spoke of his natural leadership, but his eyes kept returning to Alera. Seeing him pulled away, Alera took the opportunity to slip out onto a quiet balcony overlooking the illuminated gardens. The cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the hall. She leaned on the stone railing, looking up at the stars, feeling the hum of the bond like a comforting heartbeat in her soul. "It suits you, you know," a familiar voice said softly from the doorway. Torin stepped out, holding 2 cups of spiced cider. He offered her one. The crown, the title, the responsibility. She took the cup, warming her hands. "It feels overwhelming sometimes, like wearing a cloak that belonged to a giant." "You grew into it faster than anyone expected," he said, leaning beside her. "What you did in the hall that night, the truth you showed us all, that was the act of a queen, not a ceremony, an act." "I was just trying to save him," she said quietly. "That's what the best rulers do. They fight for their people, not their power." He took a sip of his cider. "He is a good king, but he will be a great one with you beside him. You remind him of the heart behind the crown." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "What will you do now, Captain? The kingdom is at peace." "Peace is a fragile thing," Torin said, his eyes scanning the dark tree line beyond the walls. "It needs guarding as fiercely as war. I will serve my king and my queen." He finished his drink and gave her another respectful nod. "Enjoy your night, Your Majesty. The people need to see their queen smile." He left her alone on the balcony. A moment later, warm arms encircled her from behind. Kaelin rested his chin on her shoulder. "Hiding from your public?" "Just catching my breath," she said, leaning back into his solid warmth. "It is a lot." "It is," he agreed, his voice a soft rumble against her back. "But we will face it together, every council meeting, every dispute, every long winter, together." He turned her gently to face him. "I meant my vow, Alera. I will not leave you again, not in any way that matters." "I know," she said, believing it completely. She reached up, tracing the new scar on his cheek, a permanent reminder of their ordeal. "I think I love this one most of all. It is proof you lived, proof you fought to come back to me." He caught her hand, kissing her palm. "Every scar, every memory, even the painful ones, they led you to me. They led us here, to this moment." He looked out over his kingdom, then back at her, his eyes full of a quiet, fierce joy. It was worth it, all of it. In the garden below, the first night-blooming jasmine opened its petals, releasing a sweet, hopeful scent into the air. The long winter of Silverwood was over. A new legend had begun. Chapter 8. The weeks following the coronation and mating ceremony were a whirlwind of deliberate, careful action. The euphoria of victory had to be tempered with the hard work of rebuilding trust and purging the last vestiges of Ronan's conspiracy. Kaelin spent long hours in the council chamber, but now Alara sat beside him, not as a silent ornament, but as an active participant. Her presence was a quiet revolution. At first, some of the older counselors bristled. A queen, especially an Omega queen, had traditionally advised in private, not in open court, but Kaelin was unwavering. Queen Alara's insights, particularly regarding the loyalties and intentions of those who come before us, are invaluable to the security of the realm, he stated in that first joint session, his tone leaving no room for debate. And indeed, her gift proved its worth. When a Northen emissary spoke of trade agreements with smooth, practiced words, Alara felt the avarice coiled beneath them, the intention to exploit Silverwood's temporary weakness. A subtle question from Kaelin, guided by her slight pressure of her hand under the table, exposed the dishonest clause in the proposed treaty.
Another time, a minor lord, previously allied with Ronan, came to swear renewed fealty. His words were dripping with repentant sincerity, but Alara sensed the lingering resentment, the bitterness of lost privilege. She did not accuse him. Instead, she spoke of the pack's need for unity, of the strength found in true service. Her words, infused with the gentle power of her resonance, seemed to reach past his pride and touch something more honorable. He left not just subdued, but genuinely thoughtful. Her healing gift became an open secret, a source of wonder and growing devotion. She did not hold court in the infirmary, but she made regular walks through the recovery wards where the loyalists injured in the coup were healing. Her touch, it was said, could mend a fever in an hour and knit broken bones in a day. The soldiers and guards began to look at her not just with respect for her title, but with a kind of reverent awe. She was their queen, who had fought for them with a different kind of weapon, and who now tended their wounds with her own hands. One afternoon, she was in the gardens, taking a rare moment of solitude, when she found Nessa, the scullery maid she had healed. The girl was tending a new plot of medicinal herbs, her movements careful and proud. "Nessa," Alara greeted her with a smile, "the garden is thriving." Nessa jumped, then dropped into a deep curtsy. "Your Majesty, I asked head gardener Edric if I could tend this patch after what you did for me. I wanted to learn, to help." Alara's heart warmed. "It is beautiful work. Would you like to learn more? The castle healer, Master Fenwick, is an old friend. I am sure he would appreciate a diligent apprentice." The girl's eyes widened with disbelief, then filled with tears of joy. "Oh, Your Majesty, I would be honored." This, Alara realized, was how a kingdom was truly healed, not just by punishing the wicked, but by lifting up the good, by creating opportunities where none existed before. She was walking back to the keep, her spirits lighter, when she felt a familiar, focused tension through the bond. Kaelin was worried. She changed direction, heading for his private study. She found him standing before the large map of Silverwood that covered one wall, his arms crossed, a deep frown on his face. Captain Torin was with him, along with a dusty, travel-worn scout. "What is it?" Alara asked, closing the door softly behind her. Kaelin didn't turn from the map. A report from the Ironfrost border. Movement. Unusual gathering of sentries on their side of the pass. The scout nodded. "Not an attack posture, my queen, more like watchfulness, as if they're expecting something, or guarding against something coming from our side." Alara moved to stand beside Kaelin, studying the map. The Ironfrost Peaks were one of the territories whose Alpha had sent an inquiry about her during Ronan's auction. Alpha Victor, a wolf known for his cold ambition and expansionist tendencies. He tested the waters with Ronan. Now he wonders if the new king is weak from internal strife. "That is Captain Torin's assessment as well," Kaelin said, his jaw tight. "He is probing, looking for a crack in our armor." "Then we must show him none exists," Alara said. She placed a hand on Kaelin's arm, feeling the coiled strength there. But not just with soldiers at the border. We must be smarter. We must remind him that Silverwood is not a wounded deer. It is a wolf that has just rediscovered its teeth and its heart. Kalen looked down at her, his frown easing slightly. "What do you propose?" "An invitation," she said, a plan forming as she spoke. "Not from the king to the Alpha, but from the queen to the Ironfrost people. A cultural exchange. Send our best musicians, our master weavers, our storytellers. Offer to host their artisans in return. Frame it as a celebration of peace and a new era. Openness, not fortification." Torin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "It's a bold move, non-aggressive but confident. It says we are so secure we can afford to be generous. It puts the onus on Victor. If he refuses, he looks fearful and petty. If he accepts, he brings his people into our sphere of influence, and we get a closer look at his strength. It also reminds his own pack that there is a different way to lead, one based on creation, not conquest." She looked at Kalen. "It's a gamble." A slow, proud smile spread across Kalen's face. He looked from Alara to Torin. "Make the arrangements. Draft the invitation in the Queen's name. We will send the delegation within the fortnight." He put his arm around Alara as she spoke, pulling her close. "Remind me never to underestimate your strategic mind, my heart." After the men had left, Kalen turned to her fully. "You were right about fear, you know, that day in the courtyard. Ronan's fear made him reckless. Now we must ensure our strength does not make us arrogant. Your idea, it is the perfect balance." He kissed her forehead. "How did I ever rule without you?" "Barely, from what I hear," she teased, but she leaned into his embrace, feeling the rightness of their partnership. The external threat was a sobering reminder. The work of a ruler was never done, but as she stood there with her mate, planning for not war but for a subtle, clever peace, Alara knew with certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be.
His faith in her was a shield. She nodded, taking a deep breath. The following days were filled with the ongoing work of governance. Ilara began holding her own audiences 2 mornings a week, initially for petitioners who were too intimidated by the full royal court, mostly Omegas, wounded veterans, and settlers from the outer territories. She listened to their grievances about flooded fields, disputed property lines, and unfair trade practices by local merchants. She brought these issues to Kalen and the council with clear summaries and proposed solutions, often drawing on the knowledge she'd gained simply by listening to the servants and common folk in her previous life. Her influence began to show in small, tangible ways. A new, fairer tax code for the border settlements, the establishment of a permanent royal healers outpost in Willowbrook, her hometown, a decree that any pack member, regardless of rank, could petition for apprenticeship to a master crafter if they showed aptitude. The changes were gradual, but they sent a clear message. Under the thorns, justice and opportunity were not just for the highborn. One evening, as they reviewed documents in their shared solar, a sealed message arrived by Fasthawk from the north. Kalen broke the seal, his eyes scanning the tight script. His expression was unreadable. "From Lyra," he said, handing the parchment to Alara. She read it quickly. The delegation had been received with cold formality by Alpha Victor. He was a man of few words and fewer smiles. However, his mate, Liana, a delicate-seeming Omega with eyes of frost blue, had been visibly intrigued. She had attended every performance, asked thoughtful questions of the weavers, and had privately expressed to Lyra her envy of Silverwood's vibrant court life. More importantly, the common folk of the Ironfrost Hold had flocked to the performances. The music and stories of sunny forests and flowing rivers were a novelty in their stark, stone-built world. A subtle but palpable wave of goodwill was building among Victor's own people. "He cannot dismiss us without dismissing the clear interest of his pack," Ilara said, a thrill of triumph in her voice, "and his mate's opinion will carry weight." Kalen said, pointing to the last paragraph,
for Alpha Victor and his mate to visit Silverwood for the summer solstice festival, a reciprocal gesture. Ilara met his gaze. Do we dare? We dared to send the delegation. We must dare to follow through. Kaelin took the parchment back, a determined glint in his eye. We will invite them, and we will show them a kingdom united, prosperous, and strong in ways an army cannot measure. He reached for a fresh piece of parchment. We will write the invitation together. As they composed the letter, side by side, Ilara felt the weight of the crown settle more comfortably on her spirit. This was not about pageantry or power games. It was about building bridges, stone by careful stone. It was about proving that the love that had reclaimed a throne could also forge a lasting peace. The threat from the north was not yet gone, but it had been transformed from a potential war into a diplomatic dance, and for the first time Ilara felt they were leading the steps. Later that night, as a gentle rain pattered against the window, Ilara was awakened by a soft sound, not a noise, but a feeling through the bond, a spike of dark, restless anxiety from Kaelin. She turned to find him asleep beside her, but his brow was furrowed, his breathing uneven. A nightmare. She placed a hand on his chest, over his heart, and sent a pulse of calm, golden warmth through their connection. Almost immediately, his breathing eased, the tension draining from his face. He didn't wake, but his hand came up to cover hers in his sleep, holding it there. She watched him in the dim light, this strong, brave king who carried the scars of betrayal and the weight of a realm. He was her strength, but in moments like this, she was her sanctuary. The healing went both ways. It was not just flesh and bone, but the hidden wounds of the soul. As she drifted back to sleep, her hand safe in his, Ilara knew that this, above all the councils and decrees and diplomatic victories, was the true heart of their rule. This quiet, unbreakable trust in the dark. This was the foundation upon which everything else was built. Chapter 10. Preparations for the summer solstice festival, now doubled as a state visit, swept through Silverwood Keep with vibrant urgency. Banners were woven, streets swept, and the great hall transformed with garlands of summer blooms and green branches. There was a palpable excitement in the air, a collective desire to show their best face to the world and to their own queen who had made this possible. Ilara found herself at the center of the storm, approving menus, reviewing seating charts, and overseeing the decoration of the guest quarters for the Ironfrost dignitaries. It was exhausting, but a good kind of exhaustion, born of purpose. Kaelin, however, was focused on security and the more formal aspects of the visit, the exchange of gifts, the review of the royal guard, and the precise wording of the toasts. 3 days before the solstice, as Ilara was in the gardens consulting with the head florist, a commotion erupted at the main gate. Shouts, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, and an unfamiliar blaring horn. Her heart leapt to her throat. It's too early. She gathered her skirts and hurried toward the courtyard, Kaelin joining her from the direction of the barracks, his expression alert but calm. They arrived to see not the expected grand procession from the north, but a smaller, far more disheveled party. At its head was a wolf Ilara recognized from the delegation, Rook, one of Torin's most trusted lieutenants. He was covered in road dust, and his left arm was bound in a sling. Behind him were a handful of guards, looking weary, and the minstrel Lyra, her face pale but determined. Their wagons, usually vibrant, were scarred with deep gouges, as if struck by claws or weapons. "Report," Kaelin commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathering crowd. Rook dismounted stiffly, going to one knee. "My king, my queen, we were ambushed, 2 days' ride from the border, in the Tanglewood Vale." A cold dread settled in Ilara's stomach. Ambushed? By whom? Mountain brigands? Lyra stepped forward, her musical voice now grim. "Not brigands, your majesty. They were too organized, and they wore no colors, but their fighting style,
It was military. They targeted the wagons carrying the gifts for Alpha Victor, the tapestries, the fine instruments. They smashed what they could not carry. Casualties? Kalen asked, his face a mask of stone. 3 wounded, none gravely, thanks to Lieutenant Rook's defense, Lyra said. We drove them off, but they disappeared into the tanglewood like mist. We found no bodies, no identifying marks. They weren't after plunder, Torin growled, having arrived silently. They were after the message, to make us look weak, to insult the Ironfrost by ruining their gifts, to sabotage the visit.
Ilara's mind raced. Alpha Victor? Does he know? We sent a hawk ahead from the last outpost, Rook said. Told him of the attack, but assured him we were continuing. We did not want it to seem we were turning back. Kalen was silent for a long moment, his gaze inward. Then he looked at Ilara, and she saw the same steely resolve she felt. This changes nothing. In fact, it makes our display more important than ever. He turned to the crowd of servants and guards who had gathered. Listen, our friends were attacked by cowards who hide in shadows and fear peace. This is not a sign of our weakness, but of their desperation. We will not cower. We will not cancel our welcome. We will honor our guests with double the warmth, double the sincerity. Let the world see that Silverwood's spirit cannot be broken by a handful of shadows. A roar of approval went up. The fear in the courtyard transformed into defiant energy. Ilara moved to Lyra's side. Are you truly all right? The minstrel managed a tired smile. A little shaken, Your Majesty, but more angry than afraid. The songs I composed for the festival, they will have a new verse now, one about resilience. Over the next 2 days, the entire keep worked with a feverish, united purpose. When the official Ironfrost procession finally arrived on the morning of the solstice, they were met not with a somber court recovering from an insult, but with a breathtaking display of defiant joy. Every banner flew, every citizen lining the streets held a summer flower. The royal guard stood in polished ranks, their backs straight, pride in their eyes. Alpha Victor was exactly as described, a tall, stern man with hair the color of iron and a beard woven with frost blue beads. His eyes missed nothing, taking in the flawless welcome, the clear strength of the guard, the absolute lack of any sign of distress. Beside him, his mate, Liana, was ethereal, with silver blonde hair and those cool, intelligent eyes. They widened slightly as she took in the vibrant colors, the smiling faces, the music that already filled the air. The formal greetings in the courtyard were observed with perfect protocol. Then, as Kalen was about to lead them into the hall, Ilara stepped forward. Alpha Victor, Lady Liana, welcome to Silverwood. Before we proceed, we must, in the spirit of the honesty we hope to build between our peoples, address the shadow that tried to darken your path. She gestured to Rook and Lyra, who stood to the side. Our delegation carrying gifts of friendship for you was attacked in the Tanglewood. The gifts were destroyed. A murmur ran through the Ironfrost retinue. Victor's expression remained impassive, but his eyes flickered. Liana's hand went to her throat. Ilara continued, her voice clear and strong. We believe the attack was meant to shame us, to make us appear incapable of protecting our guests, and to insult you by ruining our offering. We will not give the cowards in the shadows that victory. So instead of material gifts, we offer you this. She spread her arms to encompass the decorated keep, the smiling people, the guards standing proud. We offer you our unwavering spirit of Silverwood. We offer you our resilience, and we offer you our sincere hope for friendship, tested already by malice and found unbroken. For a long moment, Victor was silent. The entire courtyard held its breath. Then he did something utterly unexpected. He gave a short, sharp nod to Ilara, not to Kalen. A clever attack demands a cleverer response, he said, his voice a low rumble. You have shown cleverness and courage, Queen Ilara, a rare combination. He glanced at his mate. Liana was looking at Ilara with an expression of open admiration. "The gifts were symbols," Liana said, her voice soft but carrying. "What you offer today is the substance. It is impressive." She stepped forward, offering Ilara her hand not in a formal gesture, but in a more personal one. Ilara took it and felt not coldness, but a curious, respectful warmth. The tension shattered. The festival began in earnest. As the day progressed with feasting, music, and games, Ilara watched the ice frost wolves slowly thaw. Victor remained reserved, but he engaged Kaelin in serious conversation about border security and trade, the attack having provided a shared point of concern. Liana, however, blossomed. She asked Ilara endless questions about her healing gift, about the reforms for the Omegas, about the gardens. By evening, as bonfires were lit on the lawns and Lyra began a stirring song about light triumphing over shadow, Ilara saw Liana laughing at a joke from one of Silverwood's young knights, her frost-blue eyes sparkling in the firelight. Later, as fireworks painted the night sky, Kaelin found Ilara at the edge of the crowd. He slipped his arm around her waist. "You were magnificent today," he murmured in her ear. "You turned an act of war into a diplomatic triumph. Victor respects strength above all else. Today he saw it in you." Ilara leaned into him, watching the colors burst overhead. "It was not just me, Kaelin. It was all of us. The guard who stood straight, the cook who prepared the feast, Lyra who sang. We showed him a pack, Kaelin, not just a king and queen." He kissed her temple. "We did, and it is a pack I am proud to lead, with you." The shadows had tried to divide, but they had only succeeded in uniting Silverwood more firmly, and in perhaps, just perhaps, beginning to build a bridge across the mountains that had once seemed so impassable. The solstice night, the longest day, held the promise of a brighter future, forged in the fire of adversity. Chapter 11. The success of the Solstice Festival and the surprisingly productive talks with Alpha Victor ushered in a period of solid, quiet progress for Silverwood. The threat from the north, while not vanished, had been muted into wary respect. Trade agreements were signed, promising a flow of Ironfrost iron and silver for Silverwood timber and grain. More importantly, a regular exchange of scholars and healers was established, with Liana taking a personal interest in the program. It seemed the bridge Ilara had envisioned was being built, stone by careful stone. With the external pressure easing, Kaelin and Ilara could turn more of their attention inward, to the deeper healing their realm needed. One morning, over breakfast in their sunlit private dining room, Kaelin broached a subject they had both quietly avoided. "The prisoners from the coup," he said, setting his cup down with a soft click. "Ronan's inner circle. The trial council has finished its deliberations." Ilara's appetite faded. She had known this day would come. The high-ranking conspirators, Councillors Vexley and Marsh, Captain Goran, and a few others, had been held in the high-security cells beneath the keep since the night of the uprising. Their fate was Kaelin's most somber responsibility. "What is the Council's recommendation?"
"Execution," Kaelin said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "For treason and regicide. The law is clear, the evidence is irrefutable." He was looking at his hands, not at her. She could feel the conflict in him through the bond, the king's duty clashing with the man's aversion to more bloodshed, especially after so much had already been spilled. Ilara was silent for a long time. The memory of that night, of Kaelin falling before Ronan's blade, was a cold knot in her stomach. These men had orchestrated that. They had tried to murder the best man she knew and plunge the realm into darkness. A part of her, the part that had knelt in the rain and been sold like chattel, wanted vengeance, wanted them to pay. But another part, the part that had healed the stable boy and Nessa and countless others, the part that had felt the transformative power of forgiveness when offered to repentant lesser conspirators, hesitated. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. Kaelin finally looked up, his amber eyes troubled.
I want justice. I want my people to feel safe. I want it known that betrayal of the pack carries the ultimate price. But, he sighed, running his hair through his hair, every time I sign that order, I become a little more like the rulers I despised, those who ruled through fear and the block. Ronan is dead. The head of the serpent is crushed. Must we keep cutting? Alara reached across the table, taking his hand. What is the purpose of punishment, Kaelin? Is it only to make the punished suffer, or is it to protect the pack and to mend the tear their actions caused? You speak like a healer, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. I am a healer, and you are a king who heals, not just a king who conquers. The law may demand one thing, but the needs of the pack's soul may demand another. An idea, risky and radical, was forming. What if their punishment was not an end, but a beginning? Not death, but a lifetime of atonement? Kaelin's brow furrowed. Explain. The northern mountains are harsh, but they hold rich minerals our people need, she thought aloud. The settlements there are poor, constantly threatened by rockfalls and avalanches. The law says traitors die, but what if it said they are exiled, stripped of titles, names, everything, sent to those settlements not as prisoners in chains, but as laborers, to build the retaining walls, to dig the mines, to protect those communities with their strength, to give their lives not to the executioner, but to the service of the very people they betrayed. Their existence would be hard, a perpetual reminder of their crime, but it would also be useful, redemptive in a way. Kaelin stared at her, his mind visibly working through the implications. It is unprecedented. The traditionalists on the council will howl. They will say it shows weakness. Will it? Alara challenged gently. Or will it show a strength so profound we can afford to be merciful? It says our justice is not about revenge, but about restoration. It tells the pack that even the worst among them can be forced to contribute to the whole again, in the most literal way. And it removes the danger of making martyrs of them. He was silent for a long time, turning her proposal over in his mind. Finally, he squeezed her hand. We would have to frame it perfectly, not as mercy, but as a harsher, more lasting sentence, a living death in service. The council would need to be convinced. He stood, pacing to the window. But it feels right, Alara. It feels like the kind of justice that builds rather than destroys, the kind my father would have admired. The debate in the council chamber that afternoon was fierce. As predicted, traditionalists like Elder Brahm, who had lost a son in the coup's fighting, argued passionately for the blade. Blood demands blood, my king. We must show that treason is cleansed by fire, not watered down with mercy. But others, like Captain Torrin, saw the strategic wisdom. Dead men dig no mines, build no walls. Their strength is wasted. Let the mountains grind down their pride as they labor for those they sought to enslave. Kaelin let the debate rage, then stood. His voice was calm, but it carried the full weight of his authority. I have heard your counsel. The law is clear on the sentence for their crime, but as your king, it is my duty to interpret the law's purpose for the good of all Silverwood. Execution ends their threat, yes, but it also ends their debt. It allows them to escape the long, hard work of atonement. I will not grant them that escape. He outlined Ilara's plan, presenting it not as her idea, but as a royal decree. They will be taken to the Stonefoot settlements. They will live without names, without rank, under guard. They will labor to strengthen those outposts. Every stone they lay, every ounce of ore they pull from the earth will be a payment on the debt they owe to every citizen of this realm. Their existence is not death, it is service for the remainder of their natural lives. The chamber was silent. Elder Brahm looked furious, but he also looked thoughtful.
The practicality of it, the sheer, unyielding hardness of a lifetime of forced labor, began to appeal to the pack's sense of brutal justice. It was, in its way, perhaps crueler than a quick death. The decree was signed. A week later, Ilara stood with Kaelin on the battlements again, watching as the shackled former nobles were loaded into reinforced wagons, under heavy guard, destined for the cold, hard life of the northern mountains. There was no joy in the moment, only a solemn gravity. "You changed the course of our justice today," Kaelin said quietly, his arm around her. "We did," Ilara corrected, leaning into him. She watched the wagons grow small on the road. She felt no pity for the men inside, but she felt a grim hope. Their story was not over. It was being written in a different, harder way. And Silverwood's story, she knew, was now on a new path as well, one where mercy and strength were not opposites, but two sides of the same unbreakable blade. Chapter 12. With the fate of the traitors decided, a deeper peace settled over Silverwood Keep. It was the peace of a storm having fully passed, leaving clear skies and solid ground. Ilara's days found a new rhythm, balancing her public duties with the private joy of building a life with her mate. One of her proudest achievements was the founding of the Haven, a school and sanctuary established in a renovated wing of the keep. Its purpose was twofold: to formally train those with latent healing gifts, like her own, and to provide a place of learning and refuge for orphaned pack children and Omegas in need of protection.
Nessa, her first apprentice, thrived there, showing a natural aptitude for herbology. Master Fenwick, the elderly head healer, found a new lease on life, instructing a class of eager young students. Ilara spent several afternoons a week at the Haven, sometimes teaching the basics of emotional resonance, how to identify and soothe distress, sometimes simply reading to the children. It was here, surrounded by the sounds of learning and laughter, that she felt most connected to the true heart of her role. She was not just a queen on a dais, she was a guardian of the pack's future. Kaelin, in turn, embarked on a series of tours to the outer territories, something Ronan had neglected. He went not with a show of military force, but with carts of supplies, royal engineers to help with infrastructure, and judges to settle long-standing disputes. He returned from these trips with stories of resilient farmers, clever crafters, and breathtaking vistas Ilara had never seen. Each time he came home, the bond between them sang with reunion, and she would listen for hours as he spoke, her heart swelling with love for him and for the realm he served so diligently. Their partnership became a well-oiled machine. He handled the broad strategies of defense, trade, and law. She focused on the social fabric, health, education, and the subtle diplomacy of the heart. They met in the middle on everything, their council sessions becoming models of efficient, respectful debate. The pack, seeing their rulers united in purpose and clear in their love for one another, responded with a loyalty that was deep and unshakable. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ilara was in the royal library researching old treaties when a young page rushed in, breathless. "Your Majesty, you must come to the Hall of Windows, quickly!" Alarmed, Ilara followed the boy. The Hall of Windows was a long, beautiful gallery that displayed the stained glass history of Silverwood's kings. When she entered, she stopped short. Kaelin was there, but he wasn't alone. With him was an elderly wolf, bent with age but with eyes that gleamed with sharp intelligence. He was dressed in the simple, undyed robes of a lore-keeper, an order of historians and record-keepers who rarely left their secluded monastery in the Starfall Mountains. "Queen Ilara," Kaelin said, his expression a mixture of excitement and gravity. "This is lore-keeper Theron. He has journeyed a long way with a discovery." The old wolf bowed with difficulty. "Queen Ilara, and honor, the resonance of this hall. It sings of change, of healing." His voice was a dry rustle, but his gaze was penetrating. I have been cross-referencing the genealogical scrolls in our archives with the accounts of the coup. There is a discrepancy, a hidden thread. Ilara's curiosity was piqued. What kind of thread, Lorekeeper? Theron gestured to a large, unfurled parchment on a central table. It was a family tree, exquisitely detailed, tracing the thorn line back centuries. His bony finger pointed to a name, Isolde Thorn, a sister to a king 3 generations past. The records state she died young, childless, but our private monastic diaries, written by a healer who served her, tell a different story. She fell in love with a commoner, a guardsman. When the family forbade the match, they fled. She was presumed dead, but the healer's diary suggests she lived, in hiding, and had a child. Kaelin's finger traced a line from Isolde's name down through several generations of common, unrecorded names, then back up. It connected to a name that made Ilara gasp. Ronan. Exactly, Theron said. Ronan's grandmother was the secret great-granddaughter of Isolde. He had a legitimate, though distant, claim to the Thorn bloodline, a claim he undoubtedly knew of. It would explain not just his ambition, but his conviction that he was the rightful heir, especially if he believed the main line was weak or unworthy. The revelation hung in the sunlit air. Ronan wasn't just a power-hungry cousin, he was a man who believed, in some twisted way, that he was reclaiming his birthright. It didn't excuse his actions, but it explained their ferocity, their depth of planning. "Why come to us now with this, Lorekeeper?" Ilara asked softly. "The man is dead, his claim died with him." Theron's wise eyes met hers. "Because secrets buried deep have a way of festering, my queen. Because the truth, however uncomfortable, is the bedrock of true peace. You and your mate rule with a light that seeks out shadows. I bring this into the light so you may understand the full shape of the darkness you defeated, and so that no future schemer can unearth this thread and use it to sow doubt." Kaelin placed a hand on the old scroll. "Thank you, Lorekeeper. Your wisdom and courage in bringing this to us are gifts to the realm." After Theron had been shown to generous quarters, Kaelin and Ilara remained in the hall, standing before the vibrant window depicting the founding of Silverwood. "It changes nothing, and yet it changes everything," Kaelin said, finally. "I fought a traitor. Now I know I also fought a rival. It makes our victory cleaner in a strange way, more absolute." Ilara nodded, her mind absorbing the implications. "It also means the pack's loyalty to you was a choice. They knew Ronan had a claim, however thin. They chose you anyway, because of who you are." She took his hand. "That is a stronger foundation than any bloodline, Kaelin. They chose the king with the heart, not just the right blood." He pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as the colored light from the windows painted them in hues of ruby, sapphire, and gold. The past had just been rewritten, but their future felt more secure than ever. They ruled not just by accident of birth, but by the will and love of their people, and that, they both knew, was the only legitimacy that truly mattered. Chapter 13. Winter descended on Silverwood with a gentle but firm hand, draping the forests in silent white and frosting the castle battlements. The first snowflakes were falling as Ilara oversaw the final preparations for the Frost Fair, the pack's mid-winter celebration. This year it would be grander than ever, a symbol of the realm's recovery and prosperity. Amid the bustling activity, Ilara began to notice a change within herself, a lingering tiredness that wasn't eased by sleep, a newfound sensitivity to certain smells. The pine boughs brought in for decoration made her slightly dizzy, while the scent of baking gingerbread from the kitchens was suddenly irresistible. And then, one morning, the undeniable truth dawned on her, confirmed by a discreet visit from Master Fenwick. She was with child. The joy she felt was so profound it was almost painful. A child, their child, the heir to Silverwood, born of love and forged in struggle. She wanted to run to Kaelin immediately, to shout it from the battlements, but she also wanted the perfect moment. The Frost Fair, with its magic and light, seemed destiny. The night of the fair, the great hall was transformed into a wonderland. Thousands of candles glowed, their light reflecting off ice sculptures and silver decorations. The air was rich with the smells of spiced wine, roasting chestnuts, and evergreen. The pack, from the highest lord to the lowest servant's child, mingled together, sharing food and laughter. Kaelin and Alara moved among them, receiving blessings and well wishes, their happiness a tangible force. As midnight approached, the time for the traditional lighting of the solstice tree, a massive fir brought from the heart of the forest, arrived. Kaelin handed Alara the ceremonial torch, a queen's honor. As she took it, she turned to face the assembled pack, her heart hammering. The bond hummed with Kaelin's curiosity and love. "My people," she called out, her voice ringing clear in the hushed hall, "we light this tree to remember that even in the deepest winter, life and light endure. We light it to celebrate the bonds of pack and family that see us through the cold dark." She paused, meeting Kaelin's eyes. She saw the moment he understood. His eyes widened, his breath caught. A dazzling, incredulous smile broke across his face. "This year," Alara continued, her voice thickening with emotion, "we light it with a special hope, for a new light that will join our pack with the coming spring, for the future king or queen of Silverwood who grows even now." A collective gasp swept the room, followed by a moment of stunned silence. Then the hall erupted, not in cheers, but in a wave of pure, deafening joy. Wolves howled in celebration, children jumped up and down, elders wept happy tears. It was more than the announcement of an heir, it was the promise of continuity, of a future they had all fought for. Kaelin crossed the space in 2 strides, sweeping Alara into his arms, careful of the torch. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking. "Is it true?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "It's true," she whispered back, laughing through her own tears. He pulled back just enough to kiss her, a kiss of such profound joy and gratitude that the crowd roared even louder. Together, they turned and touched the torch to the base of the great tree. It ignited with a whoosh, the flames climbing the kindling to set the candles nestled in its branches ablaze. The hall was bathed in a warm golden glow. In that light, looking out at the beaming, tear-streaked faces of their people, Alara felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had come to this keep as a frightened girl with a secret gift. She had become a queen, a healer, a mate, and now she would be a mother. The circle of her life, once so shattered, was now whole and perfect. The celebrations lasted until dawn. When they finally retired to their chambers, giddy and exhausted, Kaelin couldn't stop touching her, her hand, her hair, her still flat stomach with a reverence that took her breath away. "A child," he kept saying in wonder in his voice. "Our child." "The pack's child," she corrected softly, leaning against him. "A symbol of everything we've rebuilt." He nodded, his eyes shining in the firelight. "I never dared dream this. After the poison, after the betrayal, I thought perhaps that part of life was closed to me, to us. But you, Alara, you heal everything you touch, even the deepest wounds." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the bond between them singing a new, lullaby-like song of creation and protectiveness. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Silverwood in a soft, silent blessing. The longest night was over. The light was returning, and with it the promise of a new generation to carry the legacy of love and strength into the dawn. That establishes the succession clearly, but also guarantees certain protections for all pack members, regardless of rank or designation. That makes the ruler accountable to the people, not just the ancestors. Ilara stared at him, stunned. What he was proposing was revolutionary. It would shift the balance of power in Silverwood forever, from absolute monarchy to something more shared. You would give up that power? I would share it, he corrected, to protect our child from ever facing a coup, to protect every future Alpha, Beta, and Omega from tyranny, to ensure that the pack's voice is always heard. He took both her hands. But I will not do it without you. This must be our joint legacy. The king who returned from the grave and the queen who healed the kingdom, together forging a new covenant. Her heart swelled with a love so fierce it stole her breath. This was the man she had fallen for, not just the brave warrior or the just king, but the visionary who was always thinking of tomorrow. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, let us build something that lasts, something stronger than any one throne. The plans for the Great Moot began that very day. Messengers were sent to every corner of the realm. The concept of a pack charter was met with a mixture of awe, excitement, and nervousness. But the trust Kaelin and Ilara had earned was immense. The people agreed to come. As her time grew near, Ilara's world narrowed to the castle, her body heavy but her spirit light. The nursery was ready, next to their chambers. The cradle stood empty, waiting. One evening, as a spring storm raged outside, the first pain came, sharp and unmistakable. She gripped Kaelin's arm. "It's time," she said. The next hours were a haze of effort and pain, but also of incredible strength. Kaelin never left her side, his presence a rock, his hand always in hers. Master Fenwick and Nessa attended her, their voices calm and encouraging. In the darkest hour of the night, as the storm finally broke, a new cry joined the sound of the retreating rain, a strong, healthy wail. A son. They had a son. Exhausted but radiant, Ilara held the tiny, squirming bundle wrapped in the rabbit-skin blanket. He had a shock of dark hair, and when he finally opened his eyes, they were the clear, warm amber of his father. Kaelin knelt beside the bed, one hand on his son's head, the other cupping Ilara's face, his own tears falling freely. "He's perfect," Kaelin whispered, his voice thick. "You are perfect." They named him Ronan, not for the traitor, but for the old word meaning little seal, a creature of both land and sea, adaptable and strong. It was a name that looked to the future, not the past. As the first light of dawn filtered into the room, painting the new family in soft gold, Ilara knew their greatest adventure was just beginning. They had survived betrayal, reclaimed a kingdom, and forged a new kind of love. Now they had a son to protect, a charter to write, and a legacy of light to build, and they would do it all together. Chapter 15. The Great Moot of Silverwood was an event unlike any in the realm's long history. For a full turning of the moon, the castle grounds and the town below swelled with wolves from every corner of the territory. There were fur-clad hunters from the northern mountains, sun-leathered farmers from the southern plains, merchants in fine wool, miners with dust still under their nails, healers from the haven, and omegas who stood with a new confidence. The air buzzed with 1,000 different voices, all raised not in conflict, but in the earnest, messy, beautiful work of building a future. Kaelin and Ilara did not preside from a high throne. Instead, they sat at a large round table in the center of the specially constructed moot hall, a symbol of equality. Their son, baby Ronan, was often present in Ilara's arms or sleeping in a basket nearby, a living reminder of why they were all there. The debates were fierce. How much authority should the Alpha King remain in times of war? How would the Representative Council be chosen? What were the fundamental rights of every pack member? The right to a fair hearing, the right to leave one's territory, the right to seek learning. Ilara's gift was invaluable here. She could sense when an argument came from genuine concern for the pack's good and when it was rooted in selfishness or fear. A quiet word from her, a carefully phrased question, could often steer the discussion back to its true purpose. Kalen, for his part, displayed a masterful patience and a willingness to listen that astonished even his closest advisors. He argued passionately for a strong, unified defense and for the king's final authority in matters of immediate pack safety. But he conceded ground on many domestic issues, agreeing that local councils should manage their own resources and disputes, and that no wolf could be deprived of property or liberty without the judgment of their peers. The central, most heated debate was over succession. The old way was simple. The strongest direct descendant of the alpha, usually the firstborn, inherited. But what if that heir was unfit, cruel, weak? After their experience with Ronan's hidden claim and twisted ambition, the pack was wary. A proposal emerged, championed by a young scholar from the lore keepers. It was radical. The Alpha's direct heir would be the first in line, yes, but upon the heir's coming of age, they would have to earn the acclamation of the Great Moot. The Moot, representing the whole pack, would have the right to formally acknowledge the heir as worthy. If they withheld acclamation, the succession would pass to the next in line, who would also be tested. It was a system that balanced bloodline with merit, tradition with accountability. It makes the crown a responsibility to be earned, not a prize to be seized, Ilara said during one session, little Ronan gurgling on her lap as if in agreement. It protects the pack from a tyrant and protects a good heir from whispers of illegitimacy. After days of discussion, the proposal was put to a vote, not just of the High Council, but of every delegate in the hall. When the vast majority raised their hands in favor, a thunderous cheer shook the beams of the moot hall. They had done it. They had created something new. On the final day, under a bright spring sun, the completed Silverwood Pack Charter was presented. It was inscribed on a great vellum scroll, its words a promise between rulers and ruled. Kalen and Ilara signed it first, their names at the top. Then, representative after representative from each territory and guild came forward to add their mark or signature. It was a solemn, powerful ceremony. When it was done, Kalen stood, holding his son in one arm, Ilara's hand in the other. Today, we do not just reaffirm our pack, he said, his voice carrying across the silent, gathered thousands. We redefine it. This charter is our vow to you, to rule with justice, to listen with humility, to protect with our lives. And it is your vow to us, to hold us accountable, to build this realm with your hands and hearts, to teach your children the values written here. We are not just subjects and king, we are Silverwood, one pack, one future. The silence held for a moment longer, then erupted into a celebration that lasted through the night. There was music, dancing, feasting. Ilara stood with Kalen at the edge of the green, watching their people, revel in the birth of their new covenant. Little Ronan was passed gently from admiring delegate to admiring delegate, a symbol of the hopeful future they had all crafted. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, with their son asleep in the cradle, Kalen drew Ilara onto the balcony. The stars were brilliant overhead. "It is done," he said softly. "It is begun," she corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The work of living up to it starts tomorrow." He turned, tilting her chin up. "I am not afraid of that work, not with you beside me." He looked from her to their sleeping son and back again, his eyes full of a quiet, ferocious love. "We have faced shadows and death, betrayal and winter. We have reclaimed a throne and healed a kingdom. We have brought new life into the world and given that world a new promise. What is left to fear?" Ilara smiled, looking out at the starlit forests of Silverwood, their home. "Nothing," she whispered. "There is absolutely nothing left to fear." Together they stood in the quiet night, a king and queen forged in fire, bound by love, and ready for all the peaceful, prosperous tomorrows they had fought so hard to win. Their story, the legend of the Alpha King who returned and the resident queen who healed, was now the foundation of a new age, and it was only the beginning. End of final chapter.